Okay, everyone, welcome to round three. Before we start, just a quick uh, introduction and roll call. Gav, which motion you vetoed? Government? Government? Unimas? Am I not audible?
You're audible, sir.
Okay.
Government vetoed on motion one.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay. Unimas, who will be speaking first?
Me.
Uh, Amirul, Owen, Shahira. Okay. Who will be giving reply? Government? Who will be giving reply?
Deputy Prime Minister Owen.
Okay. Opposition, are you here?
Yes, sir. We're all here.
Okay. Who is giving reply?
Me, sir. Tivagar.
Okay.
I'm sorry for disrupting, but my whip speakers are in backstage.
Okay. Upcom, please get him not backstage. Okay, great. He's here. Just give me a second. DLO. Ashley. Nabiha. Okay, great. Okay, without further delay, I welcome Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
So I will start my debate in three, two, one. So, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to adjudicators, members of the hall, and also my respectful opponents from the opposition side. So, we, the government teams, really agree that this, with the motions that this house will developing nations should adopt a non-native language such as English in Malaysia, French in Senegal as the main language of education. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is adopt? So, adopt is choose to take up or follow or use. So, adopt the non-native language such as English in our country, France in Senegal, is mean that we have the right to choose in order to learn in English or to learn in our mother tongue language, such as which is Malay. So adopt the non-native language slowly because everything start with education. So the students are studying in how to say are studying in native language during education level because when they out from when they graduate from school, of course they already master the native language and also will increase their marketing to the overseas country, to the developed country out there. So, what is non-native language? So, non-native language is the language from the first world countries such as USA, UK, France, and Japan. So,
UI.
developing nations are those the third world countries which are still in the phase of development. So, those third nations countries or we assume we categorize it as the developing nations still suffering more from economical, political, and social issues. So why is it good, and how would to implement it? So we would adopt uh, the non-native language slowly. We're not really abolishing Malay language as the mother tongue of our country, but we adopt it as the main language of education because we believe it will benefit a lot of students, especially if they're going to pursue study abroad, as English is the
POI.
universal language. So by using these non-native languages as the main language education, we do not mean that all subjects will be taught in this language, but rather most subjects where it is applicable. As for subject, will with strong ties to one's nativity, like history and native language subjects, the use of native language will be maintained. So,
POI.
POI.
wait, not yet. So the stakeholders that we, the government sides, include in this debate are those developing nations who are in need of help in increasing in pace of their development. So the matrix of this debate is whether developing nations should adopt a non-native language as the main language of education or not. So ladies and gentlemen, here is my first argument for this debate. So my first argument is it's able to increase job opportunities for people in overpopulated developing nations. How? Developing countries such as China, India has a wide population. So since they are overpopulated, it will be harder for them to get jobs in their countries as it is very competitive. But if they know this universal language such as English, France, Spain, Japan, Japanese language, from those first world country, first class world country, they have the opportunity to pursue study and get job overseas. So if they don't know the universal language, how would they get jobs at overseas since their own countries are overpopulated and is very competitive in getting any jobs? For example, ladies and gentlemen, so overpopulation is currently a serious problem in India, and it has forced many people to seek jobs outside their country, especially in more developed countries such as USA, in order to increase the quality of their life. Prior knowledge of these developed nations will surely lead them in this pursuit of a stable occupations, while also increase the probability of them surviving in these foreign countries. So how would it impact socially? So first, it will promote the increase of cultural knowledge. Second, strengthening diplomatic ties with developed countries. So how it able to give impact in economy? First, it's allow developing countries to be helped it's allowed the developing countries to be helped by developed countries, allowing strong global ties to bring these developing countries out of their turmoil. And thirdly, how it's able to give impacts politically. There, there because it's that the knowledge of the native language will be strengthened and will get keep. Uh, I'm sorry. Will be strengthened and emphasized, which will potentially increase values like nationalism. But this will get keep them from the opportunities that come from a wider global perspective. So our worst case scenario for this debate is that the native language might not be emphasized, and outside culture might be more popular among citizens, but but at least they have a better opportunities to increase their quality in life when their own country can offer that at this point of time. So with that, I would like to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to the next one, I see there are a couple of requests for the timekeeper to be shown throughout the debate. Unfortunately, putting the time uh, throughout the debate will mean the speaker will not have uh, full control of the screen, and that is not desirable. So, for those that want to keep track of time, I recommend you use your own timer, because we will continue doing as what we've been doing so far.
All
Okay.
right, noted. Thank you.
Okay, great. Leader of opposition, here.
Yes. Before that, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I don't mind having my speech interrupted for POIs. Okay, so I'll start whenever I'm ready. Is it?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Talk to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. Talk to a man in his language, it goes to his heart. A very good evening I bid to everyone present here today. Today, I, as opposition leader, wholeheartedly disagree with today's motion. That is, this House believes that developing nations should adopt the non native language as the main language of education. I'll be structuring my speech into three different compartments. Firstly, my framework that I'm going to be providing for today's debate. Secondly, the five arguments that we on side opposition are going to bring to the table today. And thirdly, my rebuttals towards the point and the entire mechanism that the first speaker of government has set up. Their entire world is slightly flawed and they haven't provided enough analysis to that, which I want to clarify on. So, but before going on to that, the stance that I'm going to bring up, that we on side opposition are going to bring up today, is that we believe that in schools, the youths are catered towards the workforce of the nation, towards the workforce within the nation. And if we're going to reread the motion today, where it states that developing nations should adopt a non-native language, right? We believe that the burden of proof on site government should be to channel the developing nations into developed nations. Therefore, I will be going into the rebuttals later, but before that, the mechanism and how our world as opposition works. We on side opposition plan to standardize the national language throughout the entire education course. Meaning on our world, we will be telling you why standardizing the national language of the country throughout the education course, going from back to primary school up till universities inside the nation, should use a standard national language for the benefits of the youth, right? So we'll be giving you five arguments and different levels of analysis on why we support these five arguments. And since side government has failed to provide a win condition for today's debate, the win condition that I, as opposition leader, I'm going to provide for today is that the team that wins today's debate is the team that proves more understanding onto a particular subject. Why we chose this win condition and why it's a general win condition today is that seemingly if you have a more understanding towards a subject, if you're more skilled in a particular skill, you'd be contributing more towards the country's workforce. And why we highlight and pressure on why it's within the country's workforce is simply because we're sticking to the motion that is we want to make our developing country into a developed country. That is one of the burden of proof that we are going to be talking about today. The second burden of proof that we are going to be talking about is simply that the native language cultivates a higher understanding, and we will be providing our analysis on that. Now, moving on, we on opposition are going to bring out five arguments today. That is argument one, the increased workload that comes with this native adopting a non-native language. Argument two, that it creates a huge amount of international confusion in the future. Argument three, to preserve the identity of the mother tongue. Argument four, the identity of the country as a whole based on its constitution is abolished. And argument five, that it is really difficult to pick up a different language. With that, let me move on to some of the rebuttals towards side government. So, side government's world as a whole, right? Said that they would adopt a non-native language in primary and secondary school. Now, that was the opening one-liner of the first of the prime minister. Now and then he's moving on into 2 minutes of his speech. He mentioned that he would be using native language in certain languages such as history. Now this in itself, ladies and gentlemen, this is the soft line. You're taking the soft line of today's debate. you're actually agreeing, sort of agreeing with opposition, but maintaining a very soft line towards this debate. We on side opposition are going right to the hard line. We're saying no, we're not going to adopt any languages. We are going to maintain the native language of our country in the field of education. Sure, if they want to be communicating with their friends in different languages, if they want to be communicating with their friends in Mandarin, in Tamil, or in English, that's up to them. But what we are doing as the opposition, the language of education should be standardized on all spectrums as the national language. And what government did was they said they're going to use the national language in certain subjects such as history. Now, if you're going to be using the native language in history, history is considered education. Therefore, you have partially agreed with us that you are going to use the native language in education, in certain parts of education. Therefore, you have already partially agreed with us in today's debate, and that is something that you have to deal with. Secondly, we identify the burden of proof as government to be converting a developing country into a developed country. So, as the motion says, they are going to be adopting a non-native language in the country, within the country, right? So the main burden of proof on government should be to develop this country into a developed country. And what the prime minister suggested was, because they're going to adopt these non-native languages, these students can pick up foreign languages, can pick up jobs overseas. What that is you're abandoning your country. You're abandoning your country when it's still developing, to go on to other developed countries, to just leave your problems, pick up other problems other way. So understanding that countries such as China or India, like you said, they have expanding job markets to accommodate the population, right? So what happens when you abandon your country is, it's going to be stagnant further on, moving on in time. There's going to be a multitude of jobs and less people in the country, and that is going to create a lot of problems, ladies and gentlemen. Before I move on to that, I have to really go into my arguments. So my first argument today is the increased workload onto teachers and students. Now we find this are extremely unnecessary. Going on as status quo now with our national language as our language of education, once you adopt a non-native language into the current education system, now it burdens both, not only students but also the teachers, because now the teachers have to first learn and master the language. Now I'm going to quote and quote on the word master, simply because you cannot just know the basics of this language to be able to teach to the students. Now, for example, if you're going to implement French in Malaysia as a subject to teach biology, now this teacher has to be a master in French. They have to have a certain extent of knowledge towards the native language by itself, in order to explain and properly teach the terms towards the students. And that is a huge uh, increased workload towards the teachers. And the students already suffering with the subjects that they have, already pressured with the amount that they have to learn. They have to now learn and master a new language in order to go on with their education, right? And secondly, something that the opposition leader never mentioned is that he mentioned that they would adopt other languages. He never mentioned what specific language they are going to adopt. He never once mentioned that they are going to adopt, for example, in Malaysia, they are going to adopt English, or in Malaysia, they're going to adopt Mandarin. Now, he never mentioned any of those. So, what that creates, right? It creates a huge amount of international confusion when every single country adopts different languages. Now, for example, Malaysia adopts Mandarin, and we see suddenly Singapore adopting Portuguese as their language of education. Moving on towards the future, moving on towards our future generation, where when our children become the leaders of the nation, there are going to be huge language problems and international problems when there is a difference in language. And with that, I've never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Here, here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, one moment. setting. So I will begin my speech in three. Hold on. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy Leader of Opposition is um, clearly misunderstanding what my Prime Minister has clearly framed out in today's debate. So, before I move on to my main arguments, I'll start with my rebuttals. And the Deputy Leader of Opposition has rebutted that by not giving students by we as a government not giving students a choice, but I mean they don't give students a choice, but they enforce the language, the national language, to be the standardized main language throughout the whole educational system. But on our side, as we said, we take this motion, the term adopt, as something that isn't forcefully implemented. So that's why, as we mentioned, we allow subjects like history to still be in Malay, because we are at the same time not abandoning our country's identity. Because subjects like history, obviously, some can be controversial if certain things are mistranslated. That's why particular subjects such as history are still left to be still in Malay and not in English. So that's just an example. Now, and the Deputy of Opposition also mentioned how how the burden is to turn developing countries into developed countries, which is true, and which is why I will prove to you later in my arguments why by standardizing by making by adopting a non-native language, be it English and whatnot, as the main language of our education. In today's debate, we will be talking about adopting like developing nations such as Malaysia adopting English as their non-native language. I mean,
PY.
as their main language. Hold on, not yet. So the 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 leader of opposition said how students and teachers need to be like masters of the new language. Obviously, the teachers need to be educated on before they can actually impart their knowledge with of the new language onto students, right? Which is why we, on the government side, we propose we will have these, sorts of these teachers exchange programs, which is basically where international teachers. It's actually a thing if you didn't know that
PY.
international teachers will come not yet to they'll be interchangeable, where they can teach the teachers here about these new languages, and hence it can be imparted on towards the students. And furthermore, as they said, it's also they need to be masters of it, obviously, before they can learn a new subject. Like example, he mentioned learning biology and French or something, which is why we said we're adopting it as a choice and it's not forceful. So for the second argument, he mentioned how it creates internal confusion in the
PY.
future. Not yet, but it won't create confusion because, as we mentioned, it's only an adoption and for certain subjects. Okay, yes, PY?
Okay, so
PY.
when you mentioned Okay, so
Yes,
when you
go ahead.
mentioned that you're going to adopt the language and not forcefully, right? What you're doing in today's debate is you're taking the soft line on today's debate. You're mentioning that yes, we will adopt a new language, but we'll also maintain the native language. In this case, you're partially agreeing with what we already said, right? That we might rather mention the
Yeah.
native language, and like you said, it creates problems with the linguistic arts and all that. Why not just adopt the native language? Please
Well,
clarify.
because
Thank you.
all right, By adopting this, non-native language, we are still proving our burden, which is as you mentioned, turning developing countries into developed countries. And I will elaborate now in my main arguments. So, firstly, this is so because of international mobility. Now, what is this? International mobility is basically developing countries are able to, learn from these developed countries. So, as we know, a prime example is English. How many developed countries use English, and English, for the purpose of like increasing international mobility, assumes that like people with English skills are able to travel to other countries more easily through methods such as studying in international schools or even working in other countries. So, by adopting these non-native languages, like English as their main language for developing countries, these students from these developing nations are able to later advance on in their tertiary education overseas in developed countries, and obviously come back and contribute to the country. And how does this affect the developing nations socially? Well, as a matter of fact, it actually helps both sides, in the developing and developed nations. Maybe for example, in like a field of health and care, developed countries can support the underdeveloped in many ways because they can send like expert doctors to like train their medical staff for trainees in these developing countries. So they can open like free medical camps in select areas of poor countries. So in a way, they're giving free medical advice to the developing countries, and the developed countries are like able to like have these sort of trainings, and the developing countries are also able to receive this free medical advice and free medical treatment. So this is just an example. Of course, it's a little irrelevant, but it's an example how both developing countries and developed countries can both benefit from encouraging from the students of developing countries adopting non-native languages such as English in from developing countries. And that's not all. Even from an economical standpoint, students who have like learn, as I mentioned earlier, learn from developing countries are able to obviously give back to their developing nation's economy by after they have finished their education in developed countries. Because obviously, what better way to learn than from a first world country such as obviously South Korea, Japan, the United States, and so on. So by doing so, it is also helping with the economy, as they are able to um, you know uh, gain more jobs, like careers in like their developing countries, and obviously advance in that areas because they could be masteries. Example, a PhD holder of a certain mastery, a certain degree, and they can like continue from there and teach those below them, maybe even in the form of a lecturer. And so today, in today's debate, the opposition's side has clearly thought, clearly assumed that we are just forcing them, but in actuality, in our paradigm, we are giving them a choice because if it is an adoption, and yes, we are agreeing to a certain extent, but this is why we are still letting them have a choice. This is why you should side government, and that we've been proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Leader of Opposition, here.
Okay, okay.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Just wait a moment. Okay, so I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Salutations to all. So today, our native language is like a second skin, so much a part of us that we resist the idea that it is constantly changing and constantly being renewed. This is a quote by Casimir. Salutations to all. And today, we as the opposition team would wholeheartedly stand against today's motion, where we as the opposition teams believes that the developing nations should not adopt a non-native language, English in Malaysia, French in Senegal, as the main language of education. We believe that in school, the youths are catered for the workforce within the nation. And before I move on with my team's arguments, I would like to first move on to the rebuttals on the government team. So just now, the Prime Minister of the government team mentioned that by implementing non-native languages in education, it helps to increase industrial incomes. But think about it, ladies and gentlemen, for investors, what attracts them is actually our own country's identity. The identity of a country comes first, no matter what. So if we as a developing country, we are already unable to preserve our own identity, how are we going to gain trust from these potential investors that we can help them to develop the country into a better way? And just now, the Deputy Prime Minister of the government team also was going on and on about the importance and how to develop a country, but not the importance of adopting a non-native language. So here, by moving on to my second rebuttal, which is the rejected, sorry. So the Prime Minister of the government team has also stated that the knowledge of language can be strengthened and widened. But we as the opposition team say we don't stop people from communicating in non-native language, but just that we want to standardize all the national language in education. So people can still communicate in these non-native languages, and their movies are still available in this non-native language as well. And moving on, the Deputy Prime Minister of the government team also mentioned that when we allow history in Malay, but when we allow history in Malay, but still implement a non-native language as a main language in education, it actually puts our native language as a side language, right? So it makes people more difficult to pick up that certain language. And how can we actually preserve the country's identity? This will be further explained in my argument. So before I proceed, any POIs? Yes. Yeah.
So using non-native language as main language of education doesn't mean we lost our identities. It's not that we learn, we adopt the culture into our culture. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But you only use the native language in education. So we're using this native language in a subject just like biology, mathematics, chemistry, in order to improve their marketing opportunity in order to pursue their jobs overseas. But it's that we did not mention that it will cause cultural identities. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, by implementing this non-native language in education as the main language of education has already proven that it is very difficult to actually preserve the identity of a country. So we as the opposition team really thinks that we have to just implement a standardized national language in order for students to actually join workforce and work for the nation further on. So moving on to my argument, which the first argument is the difficulty to pick up the language. This is an extension to the rebuttal just now, where the opposition government team has stated that implementing other subjects in native language, but not as the main language of education. Ladies and gentlemen, they are saying that they are implementing it as a side language, okay? So it makes people more difficult to pick up the language. Families are the primary source of exposure of languages towards children. So native language will be spoken to children since young, because for natives in the country, they will use that particular native language since it is their identity of their country. By being educated with a non-native language in education, it makes it more difficult to actually pick up the certain language and not even to mention mastering it. So by you're not even mastering it, how are you expecting to actually use this language for further education or for further work? So by having non-native language as the main language of education, we are saying that students are actually not equally good or bad at either languages, because it is a difficult to pick up a new language, and so they would require more time and effort, and by this, reluctantly, their understanding of their native language will then decrease. So by this, it brings me to my next point, which is native language is to preserve the mother tongue. So mother tongue language education can serve at least three purposes. First, it can ensure that every child can access their right to quality education. Second, a growing number of studies have shown that well-designed mother tongue language education programs can result in more effective educational and outcomes. And lastly, it helps countries with many indigenous languages like Malaysia to preserve our own native language, which is Malay. These programs can also be an important means of providing a sense of identity to speakers of indigenous languages and their descendants. By this is my last argument, which is the identity of a country would not be abolished if we implement a native language as the main language for education. So the loss of language undermines a people's sense of identity and belonging. So as developing nations, when there are potential tourists who enter our country, it is crucial that we are speaking in our own native language. And as this is us, our native language represents our identity. By this, I would like to reaffirm my team stance, where we, as the opposition team, strongly believe that in school, the youth are catered for the workforce within the nation, and I'm never proud enough to oppose today's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Gov Whip, here.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
All right, thank you. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Great debate today. A very good day to all. So the world that side opposition is in, apparently, so they're advocating for how it is important to keep to emphasize on our native language in education, the native language in a developing country. But they failed today, ladies and gentlemen, to tell us how by keeping native languages in developing countries is a way to cater towards the burden that they have given today, which is turning a developing country into a developed country. They kept saying that, oh, the identity will be forgotten. It doesn't mean that if we implement English or other non-native languages in a developing country means that you won't be a developed country in the long run. But today, ladies and gentlemen, they failed to prove to us the burden, which my first two speakers has proved to you, that how by learning new languages, how by creating a change in a country will eventually turn a developing country into a developed country. But they said that we will be in a stagnant place. But ladies and gentlemen, they are the ones in the stagnant place, not now. So they kept mentioning of the first speaker has said, the increase of workload. But ladies and gentlemen, our side has proved to you when there is a new initiative that needs to be done. So there are a lot of other initiatives that will cater towards that main idealism, such as for what they said, the teachers will have like a lot more to learn, and that it will be difficult for the students to learn a lot of things in one time. But there are programs in the world where they have exchange teacher programs, where teachers from this country will go to teachers to this country, and to help that country develop. So this has this diplomatic relationship with this country and this country, where it focuses on mainly education. So when you say that,
POI.
oh, it's not developing economically, politically, and socially, because these are developing countries. And how do we make these developing countries into developed countries is by education, especially when these countries are overpopulated with people. So that goes on to but before that, yes, POI.
Could you please clarify on overpopulated country, please? Can you give 3 examples? Thank you. Other than China.
This is not a factual debate, but of overpopulated countries, okay, such as Indonesia, India, they are developing countries. Indonesia, India, and all, they are developing countries, right? So you're stating us by having these native languages in their education system as the status quo is now, that you're saying that it is in a stagnant place because they're not in developed countries as of today. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there is no change happening in the education system, if based on the status quo, which I believe that the opposition is standing and advocating on, which is to keep the native language, which, as the opposition leader has stated, they cater towards the status quo, and they're proving that the status quo right now is the way to go. But why are these countries not becoming developed countries
POI.
as of today, not now? So this is where I will talk about our best case scenario and our worst case scenario. For their best case scenario, okay, if they stay with the native languages, yet they're still seen as developing countries, not as developed countries. So their worst case scenario, okay, maybe there will be. They said that, the first speaker the opposition leader stated that if there are these people who are more skillful, then they will make these countries into developed countries. These workers that focus more on skills, not into languages, non-native languages from other places, but these are developing countries. By hook or by crook, they need to know that they are developing countries for a reason. And if we want to increase the quality of the country from all aspects, we need to make a change. By how? By taking notes from other developed countries, by learning their languages, by such as countries as India, such as countries as Indonesia, they send foreign workers to work in other countries, neighboring countries from them. So they're sending workers who are laborers, who are construction workers. Why is that so? Because there is a language barrier between the countries. So if the country implements a language or really adopts non-native languages from other developed countries into their country, which we stated from my first speaker, we stated that we are not implementing it suddenly. There will be small steps in the implementing. And why the opposition keeps stating that it's a soft line, you're really agreeing to us and isn't at a soft line with us. But ladies and gentlemen, if you want to implement a new language in the education system, like suddenly like that, it is not a logic and it is not rational to do that. So that is why we thought that you would understand, because we are not implementing it suddenly and just by changing the education system. Now we are adopting. That is why the motion is adopting. We're adopting and we're taking the idea into it so that we could improve our education. The developing countries could improve their education system, making their education system better and catering towards the other countries in the world to develop economically, politically, and socially. So that is why we here win the debate for today, because our best case scenario, we are looking towards quality, ladies and gentlemen. But you at the opposition side, they kept saying, stay with the native languages, stay with the status quo right now. But these are developing countries for a reason. If you want change, then implement change, but slowly and surely it will, because everything starts with education. Politics starts with education. Economic starts with education. Mainly in these overpopulated countries, where these countries will implement slowly, then they will help the country by taking notes from other countries to help their country grow, not only just focusing on their shell of a country. So why is our worst case scenario better than their best case scenario? Because if it's not like if it's hard for the students, it still and surely will be the best initiatives, nevertheless, because we're adopting it slowly and we are implementing it slowly in the system, so it caters towards every single student's capabilities and that country's capabilities towards the choice of non-native language. Thank you. So with that, I would never be more proud to propose the motions of today. So the motion still stands nevertheless. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Oops, sorry. Opposition whip, here.
Here, sir. Hold on. Hello.
Wait, you're a bit lagging, or is it just me? Does anyone else?
Hello, hello, hello,
I
hello.
can hear you. I can hear you clearly.
I'm so
Now it's
sorry, my wife. I'm
don't
so
worry.
sorry, my Wi-Fi disconnected.
Don't worry about it. Now it's okay.
Okay, how?
Okay.
Okay, camera is okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A beautiful country comes from the power of their mother tongue. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I, as the third speaker of the opposition team, would like to rebut some of the points from the government team. First of all, the this first speaker said, quote, able to promote job from developing country which is overpopulated. By this, we oppose strongly. It is because if they want to work outstation, they still have a chance or choice to opt to learn other languages. It is not too late for them to learn other languages. Let me give you a two-world scenario. Firstly, if we prioritize our mother tongue and and they have a choice to learn other language, which is fine because they want their future to learn to other countries. But here's the thing. Second world would be it is also equal for them. Sorry, it's not too late for them to learn other language. So why not we preserve the mother tongue like our second speaker argued about the identity of a country will be abolished if we don't preserve our mother tongue. Here is why it is important to preserve our mother tongue. Look at us surround us. Like we are too influenced by the people, for example, the Americans. We are too influenced to them until we forgot our own mother tongue. This is why it is important to implement mother tongue as our prioritization on education. I repeat, guys, on our education. Before I like to go on to my next rebuttal, is there any POIs? Okay, no, thank you. Now, next rebuttal is the first speaker said, quote, non-native language helps to increase developing countries' marketing. End quote. This is ridiculous. Why support other country when we ourselves can actually hire our marketing strategy of our mother tongue itself? The beauty of our mother tongue itself can actually prove the power of marketing and and increase the economic status of our own country. Do you know that developed countries grow because of their mother tongue? Let me give you three examples of which country it is. First, Korean. We are influenced by their entertainment, and because of their entertainment, they keep on singing on Korean language. Do you hear any other language? Well, maybe some, but they prioritize on Korean first. Second, Japanese. Japan. They prioritize on Japanese language on their animated show. Third, France. If you go to a country, France, they will speak French because they are so proud about their mother tongue. So why can't we be proud of our mother tongue? We should be proud of our mother tongue through education, because by that we can actually preserve our identity of the country. And you also mentioned about politics. In politics, we use native language, and it's proven that every native language smoothens the political system. Let me give you an example of France and China. They debate in the parliamentary style by using their own native language. Have you ever heard of them speaking on other native language? No. And they still prove their economical status is stable. It's because they prioritize their mother tongue. That is how they identify themselves as their own country. They are proud to represent their country, ladies and gentlemen. This is why it is supported by our second speaker, which is identity of a country would be abolished if we prioritize the non-native language. Now I'm going to go to the next rebuttal, but before that, is there any POIs?
Yes, POI.
Okay, go ahead.
So you're saying that all these countries are developing by their native languages and all, but why are there still most developing underdeveloped countries that implement their native language in education still not becoming developed countries?
I would say majority of the developing country has successfully proven that mother tongue actually is the main success. It's because that, like I said earlier, okay, let me give you another example. Okay, let me give you another example. Brazil, okay? Spain. Spain itself is a developed country. And have you seen their dynasty? Their dynasty is and political system is growing, and so as well as their entertainment is because their politics and entertainment focus on their mother tongue. Have you heard of them speaking about other language? No, it's because this, I would say, majority, I repeat, majority of the country actually has proven the success of mother tongue. We won't know about their mother tongue if they don't present their own identity.
POI, ma'am.
Next rebuttal is that the second speaker said that to employ international teacher, we are against this argument. It is because why burden the country spendings? Now, if we want to employ international teachers, for example, we want to employ teachers from Portugal so that to allow our students to learn non-native language in Portuguese, and we want to employ teachers from German for our students to learn Germany. So why do you want to burden the country spendings where we actually should prioritize on our country's native language? By that, when
POI,
we
ma'am.
prioritize our native language, they will come to our country to learn about our native language. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how we want to attract other people to come to our country. It is because that when we represent ourselves with our mother tongue, hence we get to prove again, once again, about the power, the soft power of using the mother tongue. Next, well, where I said why burden the country spending, this relates with our first speaker argument, which is it increases the workload of teachers. Well, workload of teachers, as in when you mentioned about international teachers, why burden the workload of international teachers? Am I right? And the impact is the Ministry of Education are actually neglecting the teachers here, especially the mother tongue teachers here, is because they are prioritizing other teachers from international scope. So there are thousands of unemployed international of teachers here who can't teach our mother tongue. And let me bold on this statement: language on education, not language on occupation. With that, I oppose. We oppose. Thank you.
Thank you. To conclude opposition's case, op reply. Here.
Okay, thank you. I can be heard.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Oh, hang on. Okay. A very good evening once again to everyone present here today. Today, I would like to conclude and tell you why we have won today's debate. And we look at all the clashes inside government they've come up with and the huge contradiction between the third speaker and the first two speakers, right? Now, before that, the whole ideology of turning a developing country into a developed country has been understood wrongly by side government. Now, the agenda that the first two speakers were pushing, right, I think they misunderstood it. So, but before that, to convert a developing country to a developed country, you would have to increase its employment rate and capital income. To push a country towards employment, the employment rate and capita per income of every citizen should be at an all-time high. Therefore, the workforce, the national workforce of the country should be at its prime and full. So what this means, right? We as Malaysians, when we move into our workforce, all of us, if every single Malaysian youth right now moves into the Malaysian workforce, works at full, our country would strive faster towards becoming a developed country. It isn't about language barriers, it isn't about understanding a language. That is how we push towards a developed country, right? And why we say the youths of the country become the workers of the same country is when we adopt if we is when we implement the native language of the country themselves, of the country. When they provide go on to their workforce, they will only be using their native language. They aren't going to be using a non-native language in their workforce, right? Because simply because they're working in that specific country. Now, the agenda the first two speakers were pushing was when you learn a non-native language is you can get job opportunities in other countries. You can go overseas to get jobs. Now, this isn't going towards to a developed country. You aren't on the track to moving towards development. What you're doing is you're promoting abandonment of the country. It's not to help the country, it's simply to help themselves. They are abandoning their country in order to seek a better life, in order to live more luxurious lives. So people who move on to other countries to find jobs, they aren't going to come back and develop their country. No, they are going to stay in these foreign countries and they are going to just continue on working like how they started, right? And here's the thing, what third speaker came up in her speech and mentioned, right, went against whatever the first two speakers said. Because now the third speaker's understanding on today's debate was that when they bring in teachers from these developed countries in taking a language from one of these developed countries, playing it in today's debate, would make this developing country into a developed country. And then her suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, to bring teachers from different countries, a foreign teacher exchange program. Now, this opens a huge door to new problems. Now, understanding that this program does happen, it happens all over the world, but it happens on an extremely small spectrum. It happens maybe on two teachers in one single school, in one small school. It happens on extremely small scales, not even on a scale of foreign student exchange program. This is extremely tiny. What we are debating today on an international scale would open a huge door to new problems, right? So let's look at it. Funding. How you're going to have to fund to shuffle thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers around to different countries in order for them to what, teach their language onto other students? Do you think the funding of that is necessary? We have bigger problems that we're striving towards. There are so many more important worldly problems, so many more problems that the country is facing, rather than to introduce a new language. This funding can be used in so many better ways than to sending these teachers around. That's a complete and absolute waste of your money by implementing this brick program. And this was only talked about in the third speaker speech. It went against everything the first and second speaker talked about. And then next, the language barrier that is going to happen. For example, if we're going to import a teacher from America to teach in Malaysian schools, she will not know a single sentence in Malay. What happens now is she has to learn this new language and to teach these new students. The language barrier that comes into exist would now increase the workload even more of these teachers and students. That's completely, utterly ridiculous to talk about in today's debate. Now, to complete my reply speech, the 5 points that we have talked about is that we would be increasing the workload if we introduce a non-native language. We create a huge amount of international confusion in the future. We would be preserving the native tongue in status quo. The identity of the country would be maintained, and it would be extremely difficult to pick up a new language moving forward. And side government, on the other hand, brought up almost no substantive points other than they can get jobs overseas, which in today's debate doesn't factor simply because it cannot push the country towards where it's supposed to go. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. To conclude today's debate, Gaf reply, here, here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, 1 second. I will begin. Okay, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very clear that in today's debate, aside from the opposition's leader, we can see that their deputy leader of opposition, as well as their whip speaker, is clearly taking the direction of today's debate into a less relevant direction, and it is not responding to the burden stated by the leader of opposition himself. They are clearly contradicting, as a matter of fact, their leader of opposition's burden, which is, as you mentioned, emphasizing on how these developing countries can become developed countries. So, on their side, they are too focused, on their own country, that they are not actually, developing their country. And the whip speaker, their whip speaker, given an unrealistic example of how, China, being proud of their mother tongue, and they don't talk about other languages, right? Because they're already and they just use their own mother tongue, and they're developed and they become a developed country. But it is unrealistic to compare a country like China, which has obviously other factors which have contributed to their development, in other forms of industries, compared to like countries like Indonesia, for example. And the whip speaker also mentioned, gave examples of how they use their mother tongue in politics or in entertainment, which is, like, for example, like South Korea. Yeah, but today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, the motion is clearly this House would, developing nations should adopt a non-native language as the main language of education. So whatever the whip speaker has been speaking about is gone quite far away from the main topic, the main thing we're talking about today, which is education, the main theme of today's debate. So the leader of opposition also, has a really pessimistic point of view when he mentions how, these people who are given, uh, are actually are able to go to other developed countries, and he mentions how they will just probably stay there and live in luxury and just abandon their country. But when it's undeniably true that, what better way can a developing country learn and advance or develop than to learn from a developing country? If you think about it realistically, that is the best way a developing country can actually learn and develop, to be maybe even a first world country. So on our side, on the other hand, um, we were consistent throughout our arguments, as from my prime minister all the way to my whip speaker. We clearly emphasized how we our worst case scenario, if how why our worst case scenario is better than their best case scenario, because their best case scenario is probably they maintain their country's identity, their roots and whatnot, but they won't be seen as developed countries. Our worst case scenario is still better than theirs. Their best case scenario, however, is because our worst case scenario is that, while the native language may not be as emphasized and the identity, as they keep on arguing, might be a little lost, even though I have clearly mentioned that, and all the way till my web speaker, that by adopting this language, it is, a slow process that they are built, by adopting these non-native languages of other countries, they are building these diplomatic relationships with other countries, and in turn, those other countries will learn about these developing nations' culture and identity, right? So it's not being lost at all. So hence, we believe that in today's debate, side government has won this debate because we responded to the burden of today's debate of how the motion will actually then benefit developing countries in order to help them develop. And because of this, I believe that side government has won today's debate. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Cross floors, virtually shake hands if you want to. Please wait a while in this place while I go in, finalize the results, and then we'll talk about the debate. Thank you, everyone.